Blue flashing lights cut through the heavy midnight fog, turning a routine gas station run into a nightmare. Most people would panic as aggressive hands slammed them against the cold metal of a patrol car. Corinne Landry did not panic. She memorized badge numbers. When two arrogant deputies slapped handcuffs on a woman they deemed a nobody, they had no idea they were sealing their own professional graves. They laughed as they threw her into the back of their cruiser, unaware that the very next morning they would have to stand before her in a court of law, begging for their careers. The flickering neon lights of the Chevron station on Route 41 cast long, distorted shadows across the cracked concrete. It was late at night in Oak Haven, Georgia, a county where the humidity clung to the skin even in the dead of night, and where old prejudices often died hard. Corinne Landry was exhausted. At 52, she was a woman who commanded respect with a mere glance, possessing an elegant, unyielding posture forged through decades of hard work. But tonight, she was just a tired mother driving her daughter's beat-up 2012 Honda Civic. Her own sensible Lexus was in the shop with a blown alternator, and she had spent the entire evening helping her youngest daughter move out of her college dorm 2 towns over. Dressed in faded denim jeans, a loose college sweatshirt, and a pair of worn-out sneakers, Corinne looked nothing like the Honorable Judge Landry, the newly appointed and highly formidable presiding judge of the Oak Haven County Superior Court. She looked ordinary to the 2 men watching her from an unmarked patrol vehicle parked in the shadows across the street. She looked like an easy target. Deputies Harlan and Tate Lennox were bored. Harlan, a 10-year veteran with a reputation for a short temper and a deeply ingrained sense of superiority, was tapping his fingers aggressively against the steering wheel. Lennox, younger and eager to please his senior partner, was scrolling mindlessly on his phone. "Look at this," Harlan muttered, his eyes narrowing as he watched the black woman step out of the rusted Honda to pump gas. Out late at night, driving a beater with a busted tail light. "Let's run the plates." Lennox typed the license plate into the system, registered to a Chloe Landry. Clean record. Insurance valid. "Doesn't mean a thing," Harlan sneered, shifting the cruiser into drive. "Let's go have a little chat. She looks nervous." Corinne wasn't nervous. She was calculating whether she had enough energy to go inside and buy a black coffee from Frankie Mills, the night clerk she had known for years, or if she should just finish pumping the gas and head straight to bed. She had a heavy docket starting in the morning. The roar of the cruiser's engine broke the quiet of the night. The vehicle lurched into the gas station lot, stopping at an aggressive angle that effectively blocked the Honda in. The red and blue lights flared to life, illuminating the sleepy gas station in a harsh, strobe-like glare. Corinne sighed, slowly releasing the gas pump handle. She turned around, her expression neutral, hands remaining visible at her sides. She knew the law. She knew the procedures. Most importantly, she knew exactly how these encounters could escalate. The doors of the cruiser opened simultaneously. Harlan stepped out, a menacing smirk playing on his lips, his hand resting casually on the butt of his service weapon. Lennox flanked him, puffing out his chest to mirror his partner's intimidating stance. "Evening," Harlan said, his tone lacking any trace of Southern hospitality. "Whose car is this?" "Good evening, officer," Corinne replied, her voice steady, modulated, and calm. "It belongs to my daughter." "Is that right?" Harlan took a step closer, invading her personal space. He smelled faintly of stale tobacco and cheap cologne. "You got ID on you?" "I do. It is in my purse on the passenger seat." Corinne gestured slightly toward the open window of the Honda with her chin, deliberately keeping her hands still. "Well, go get it," Harlan commanded, his voice sharp. Corinne turned slowly to reach through the open window. As her fingers brushed the leather strap of her purse, Harlan's voice barked out like a gunshot. "I didn't say reach into the vehicle. Step back. Step the hell back from the car." Startled by the sudden manufactured aggression, Corinne pulled her empty hands back and took a measured step away from the car. "Officer, you just asked me to retrieve my identification. I was complying with your direct order." "Don't you talk back to me," Harlan snapped, stepping into her space again, so close she could feel the heat radiating off his body. "You're acting erratic. You look like you're under the influence. Turn around and put your hands on the vehicle." Corinne's eyes narrowed. A cold, sharp intellect analyzing the situation in milliseconds. This was it. This was the abuse of power she read about in dockets and heard about in testimonies, playing out right in front of her. She could end this right now. She could say the words, "I am Judge Corinne Landry of the Superior Court. I sign your warrants. I preside over your cases." But as she looked into Harlan's arrogant eyes and saw the passive complicity in Lennox's face, a different thought took hold. If she used her title to shield herself, she would never truly know how these men treated the citizens of Oak Haven, who had no power, no voice, and no title. She needed to know exactly what kind of officers were patrolling her streets. She chose the harder path. She chose silence. "I am not under the influence, officer, and I am not resisting," Corinne stated calmly, turning around and placing her hands flat on the cold, rusted roof of the Honda. Before she could brace herself, Harlan grabbed her left arm, wrenching it behind her back with excessive, punishing force. The sudden pain shot up to her shoulder. She gasped, her knees buckling slightly, but she caught herself. "Stop resisting!" Harlan yelled for the benefit of his partner's body camera, a classic tactic to justify his violence. "I am not moving," Corinne said through gritted teeth, her face pressed against the roof of the car. The cold metal of the handcuffs bit brutally into her wrists as Harlan ratcheted them tight, deliberately too tight. They pinched her skin, cutting off the circulation. Frankie Mills, the gas station clerk, ran out from the sliding glass doors, holding a mop. Hey, what are y'all doing to her?" Frankie shouted, his voice trembling. "That's Miss Landry. She ain't done nothing wrong." "Get back inside before I arrest you for interfering with an investigation," Lennox barked, pointing a finger at the terrified clerk. Frankie retreated, pulling out his cell phone to record from behind the safety of the glass. Harlan yanked Corinne backward, pulling her up by the chain of the handcuffs. It was a humiliating, agonizing maneuver. "You're under arrest," he growled in her ear. "On what charge?" Corinne asked, her voice eerily composed despite the throbbing pain in her shoulders. "Failure to identify and resisting arrest," Harlan spat. "We'll see how smart you act when you're sitting in a holding cell. Get in the car." As they shoved her into the hard plastic back seat of the cruiser, Corinne committed every detail to memory. The unjustified stop, the contradictory orders, the excessive force, the false charges. Deputy Brock Harlan and Deputy Tate Lennox had just lit a match and tossed it onto a powder keg, entirely unaware of the explosion that awaited them at dawn. The ride to the Oak Haven County precinct was agonizing. The back of the cruiser smelled heavily of industrial bleach and old sweat, a grim reminder of the countless terrified souls who had occupied this seat before her. Corinne sat perfectly upright, despite her hands being shackled painfully behind her back. Every bump in the uneven rural road sent jolts of pain through her shoulders. In the front seat, the two deputies were entirely relaxed, completely ignorant of the fact that they had just kidnapped a sitting judge. "Can you believe the attitude on her?" Harlan laughed, adjusting the rear-view mirror to catch a glimpse of his prisoner. "Thought she could just lecture us." "I was complying with your direct order," he mocked in a high-pitched voice. Lennox chuckled nervously. "You think she's really sober? We didn't do a breathalyzer." "Don't matter." Harlan waved a hand dismissively. "She got mouthy. We hit her with resisting and failure to identify. She'll spend the night in the tank, get a public defender who doesn't care, and plead out to a misdemeanor to avoid jail time. They always do. Another notch on the belt, Tate." Corinne listened in the dark. They always do. The casual admission of systemic corruption chilled her to the bone. This wasn't a mistake. This was their standard operating procedure. They hunted for people they perceived as weak, ruined their nights, and trapped them in the legal system just to stroke their own egos. When they arrived at the precinct, the humiliation continued. They paraded her through the double doors into the brightly lit booking area. Sergeant Brock Ellis, a heavy-set man with tired eyes, was manning the desk. "What do we have here, Harlan?" Ellis asked, barely glancing up from his paperwork. "Late-night wanderer got aggressive, resisting arrest. Failure to identify," Harlan stated proudly, tossing the keys on the counter. Ellis finally looked up. He squinted at Corinne. Her hair was messy from the struggle, her sweatshirt rumpled, but her posture was as rigid as a steel beam. There was something in her eyes, an intense, calculating focus, that made Ellis pause. She didn't look scared. She looked like she was memorizing his face. "Name?" Ellis asked, poising his pen over the booking sheet. "Corinne Landry. Date of birth, August 14th, 1973. Occupation?" Corinne met the sergeant's eyes directly. "State employee." It wasn't a lie. "All right, empty your pockets." "We got her purse from the car. It's in evidence," Ellis muttered. She was fingerprinted, photographed, and stripped of her shoelaces and jacket. Every step of the way, Harlan stood nearby, making snide remarks, trying to provoke a reaction. Corinne gave him nothing. Her silence seemed to infuriate him more than any screaming or crying would have. He wanted her broken. She remained stone. She was placed in holding cell 4. The heavy iron door clanged shut, a sound that usually triggered profound despair. The cell was freezing, smelling of urine and stale vomit. The metal bench offered no comfort. Corinne sat cross-legged on the cold steel, closing her eyes. She did not sleep. She spent the early hours methodically structuring her thoughts, outlining the exact legal statutes Harlan and Lennox had violated. False imprisonment, assault under color of authority, deprivation of rights under the Fourth Amendment. In the morning, the precinct began to stir. The night shift was ending and the morning shift was arriving. A young, fresh-faced officer approached her cell. "Miss Landry, you get your phone call now." Corinne nodded, standing up smoothly despite her stiff joints. She walked to the wall phone at the end of the corridor. She dialed a number she knew by heart. "Hello?" a sleepy voice answered. "Caleb, it's me," Corinne said softly. "Corinne, good Lord, where are you? I woke up and the bed was empty. I called your cell a dozen times." Her husband's voice was laced with panic. "I'm at the Oak Haven precinct. I was arrested last night at the Chevron station." There was a dead silence on the line. Then Caleb's voice dropped an octave, the tone shifting from panicked husband to a man who had spent 30 years married to a brilliant legal mind. "Are you hurt?" "Bruised wrists. Nothing broken." "Caleb, listen to me carefully. I need you to come down here and post bond. It should be standard for a misdemeanor resisting charge. But do not, under any circumstances, tell anyone at this desk who I am. Just pay the bond and get me out." "Corinne, what is going on?" "I'll explain in the car. Just hurry. I have a docket in the morning and I refuse to be late." By mid-morning, Caleb Landry, wearing a sharp overcoat and a grim expression, handed over the cash for the bond. The desk sergeant handed him the receipt and buzzed the heavy doors open. Corinne walked out, clutching the plastic bag containing her shoelaces and her purse. She didn't look back at the booking desk. Once in the passenger seat of Caleb's car, the stoic mask finally slipped just a fraction. She leaned her head against the window and took a deep, shuddering breath. "Corinne," Caleb said softly, seeing the red, raw rings of bruises encircling her wrists as she fastened her seatbelt. His jaw tightened. "Who did this?" "Deputy Brock Harlan and Deputy Tate Lennox," Corinne replied, her voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register. "They decided to play God last night. They picked the wrong person. You want me to call the chief of police right now? I'll have their badges on a silver platter before breakfast," Caleb offered, reaching for his phone. "No," Corinne stopped him, placing her bruised hand over his. "The chief will sweep it under the rug, put them on paid administrative leave, and let it quietly fade away. They need to understand the weight of the law they abused. They need to face it in the light of day." She looked at the digital clock on the dashboard. "Take me home, Caleb. I need a shower, a very strong cup of coffee, and my favorite suit. I have court." Meanwhile, back at the precinct, deputies Harlan and Lennox were clocking out of their overnight shift. They were exhausted but riding high. "You grabbing breakfast, Brock?" Lennox asked, stifling a yawn. "Nah, I can't," Harlan grumbled, pouring a cup of terrible break-room coffee. "We got that preliminary hearing on the Diaz drug bust in the morning over at the Superior Court. Overtime pay at least." "Who's presiding over that one again?" Lennox asked, rubbing his eyes. "Judge Henderson retired last month, remember? We got the new one. Transferred in from the appellate division or something. Judge Landry. Supposed to be a real hard-ass by-the-book type. Make sure your boots are shined, Tate. We don't want to get on a new judge's bad side. Got it?" Lennox nodded. "You think that lady from last night is still in the tank?" Harlan laughed, a cruel short bark. "Who cares? She's the system's problem now." In the morning, the Oak Haven County Courthouse was buzzing with the usual morning chaos. Lawyers in wrinkled suits ran through the marble corridors. Anxious defendants huddled with their families. In the private judge's chambers behind courtroom 3B, the atmosphere was completely different. It was dead silent. Corinne Landry stood in front of the full-length mirror. She was wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit. Her hair was immaculately styled, her makeup flawless, erasing any trace of the sleepless night spent on a metal bench. Her bailiff, a towering, fiercely loyal retired Marine named Donovan Reed, stood by the heavy oak door holding her black judicial robe. He had seen the bruises on her wrists when she arrived. He hadn't asked questions, but the furious set of his jaw indicated he knew something was deeply wrong. "You ready, Your Honor?" Donovan asked, his deep voice rumbling in the quiet room. Corinne extended her arms. Donovan draped the heavy black silk over her shoulders, the fabric settling with a sense of immense gravity. She adjusted the collar, feeling the familiar, empowering weight of the robe. This wasn't just clothing. It was a symbol of justice, of order, and of consequence. "I am ready, Donovan," Corinne said softly. She looked at her own reflection. The woman who had been shoved against a rusted car, humiliated and caged, was gone. In her place stood the absolute authority of the law. "Let's go to work." Courtroom 3B of the Oak Haven County Superior Court was a theater of mahogany and polished brass. It smelled heavily of lemon pledge, old paper, and the nervous sweat of those awaiting their fate. The gallery was packed. Defense attorneys huddled in the aisles, whispering frantically to their clients, while prosecutors organized towering stacks of manila folders on the state's heavy wooden tables. In the front row, directly behind the wooden partition separating the gallery from the well of the court, sat deputies Harlan and Tate Lennox. They were dressed in their Class A uniforms, the brass buttons polished, their badges gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. Despite their sharp appearance, both men were running on fumes. "I swear if this preliminary takes more than an hour, I'm going to sleep right here on this bench," Harlan complained, rubbing a hand over his face. He checked his watch. "Let's just get up there. Say he had the drugs in plain view and go home." "You think the defense will press us on the search?" Lennox asked, his knee bouncing with a nervous, caffeinated energy. "Let him," Harlan scoffed, leaning back and resting his arms on the back of the pew. "We wrote the report tight. Plus, this new judge, Landry, word is she's a stickler for moving the docket along. She won't want to drag this out. Judges love us, Tate. We're the good guys." At the start of the session, the heavy oak door beside the judge's bench swung open. Donovan Reed, the towering bailiff, stepped out, his voice booming across the noisy room like a crack of thunder. "All rise." The chatter instantly died. Dozens of people scrambled to their feet. The sound of shuffling chairs and scuffling shoes filled the cavernous space. "The Superior Court of Oak Haven County is now in session," Donovan announced, his eyes sweeping the room with military precision. "The Honorable Judge Corinne Landry presiding. God save the state and this honorable court." From the shadows of the antechamber, Corinne emerged. The heavy black silk of her judicial robe billowed slightly as she climbed the 3 steps to the elevated bench. She did not look at the gallery. She did not look at the prosecutor or the defense. She looked straight ahead, an aura of absolute, uncompromising authority radiating from her. She took her seat in the high-backed leather chair, folded her hands precisely on top of the polished mahogany, and leaned forward toward the microphone. "Be seated," she commanded. Her voice was calm, modulated, and crystal clear. In the front row, Harlan froze. The air left his lungs in a sudden violent rush, as if he had just taken a physical blow to the sternum. He knew that voice. He had heard that exact steady cadence just hours ago in the humid, flickering light of a Chevron gas station. He slowly raised his head, his eyes locking onto the woman sitting 20 feet above him. The messy hair was now styled into an immaculate, elegant twist. The baggy college sweatshirt was replaced by the solemn black robe, but the face, the sharp, intelligent eyes, the strong jawline, the unyielding expression, was identical. It was the woman he had shoved against a rusted Honda. It was the woman whose arms he had wrenched behind her back. It was the woman he had thrown into a urine-soaked holding cell. Harlan's face drained of all color, turning a sickly ashen gray. A cold sweat broke out across his forehead, prickling his scalp. His stomach plummeted into free fall. Beside him, Lennox let out a sound that was half gasp, half whimper. "Brock!" Lennox choked out in a microscopic whisper, his eyes wide with absolute terror. "Brock, that's her. Tell me I'm hallucinating. Tell me that ain't her." "Shut up," Harlan hissed through clenched teeth, though his own jaw was trembling. "Just shut up and don't move." They were trapped. There was no back door, no dark highway to hide on, no holding cell to throw her into. In this room, they were completely at her mercy. And they both knew, deep in their bones, that they had shown her none. Corinne opened the heavy leather binder containing the day's docket. She knew exactly where Harlan and Lennox were sitting. She could feel their panic radiating from the front row, like heat off asphalt. But she did not grant them the satisfaction of a glance. She would not let this become personal. She would let the law be her instrument. "Mr. Reed, call the first case," Corinne instructed. For the next 45 minutes, Harlan and Lennox sat paralyzed, in a state of suspended agony. They watched as Judge Landry dispatched justice with terrifying efficiency. She was brilliant, citing obscure case law from memory, catching a seasoned prosecutor in a procedural trap, and reprimanding a defense attorney for a sloppy filing. She was fair, but she was mercilessly thorough. Every time she spoke, the deputies flinched, remembering the insults they had hurled at this legal powerhouse. "Call the next case," Corinne finally said, her eyes dropping to the specific file she had been waiting for. "State of Georgia versus Derek Lang," Donovan called out. "Cause number 44-CR-1992, preliminary hearing." Assistant District Attorney Nolan Caldwell stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. "The state is ready, Your Honor. We call Deputy Brock Harlan and Deputy Tate Lennox to the stand." Harlan's legs felt like they were made of lead. He stood up, his knees nearly buckling. Lennox followed, looking as though he were walking to the gallows. They moved through the swinging wooden gate and took their places. Harlan in the witness box. Lennox seated at the law enforcement table just below the bench. "Raise your right hand," Donovan ordered, stepping forward with a Bible. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?" "I do," Harlan croaked. His throat was entirely dry. "State your name and badge number for the record," Corinne said, finally turning her gaze directly onto him. The eye contact was a physical shock. Her dark eyes were devoid of anger. They were cold, calculating, and piercing. It was the look of a predator analyzing prey caught in a steel trap. "Deputy Brock Harlan, badge number 4092. "Proceed, Mr. Caldwell," Corinne said, leaning back in her chair. Caldwell walked to the podium. Deputy Harlan, on the night in question, you initiated a traffic stop on Mr. Lang's vehicle. Can you explain your probable cause? Harlan cleared his throat, desperately trying to remember his rehearsed lines. Yes. The suspect's vehicle had a broken tail light, and he was swerving over the center line. When we approached the vehicle, he was acting erratic. We asked for identification, and he was uncooperative. Uncooperative? Corinne interrupted, her voice slicing through the courtroom. The single word hung in the heavy air. Caldwell paused, looking up at the bench. Yes, Your Honor. Harlan swallowed hard. He was arguing. I see, Corinne said, picking up her pen. And in your professional training, Deputy Harlan, does verbal disagreement constitute physical resistance? No, Your Honor, but he refused to provide his ID. Failure to identify, Corinne mused, writing something down. The scratch of her pen echoed loudly over the microphone. A charge you seem quite fond of utilizing. According to your report, you then removed Mr. Lang from the vehicle. Did you order him out, or did you physically extract him? I ordered him out, Your Honor. Are you certain of that, Deputy? Corinne's voice dropped a fraction of an octave. Because the defense has submitted a motion regarding the lack of body camera footage for this specific 2-minute window. You noted in your report that the camera malfunctioned. A convenient malfunction, wouldn't you agree? Harlan's hands were shaking so badly he had to grip the wooden railing of the witness box to steady them. It's old equipment, Your Honor. It glitches. It glitches, she repeated softly. Let us talk about your methodology, Deputy. When an individual is, as you say, acting erratic but has committed no violent offense, what is the Oak Haven Sheriff's Department protocol for de-escalation? Harlan stared at her, completely blank. He hadn't used de-escalation tactics in a decade. We secure the suspect for officer safety. You secure them, Corinne translated, by throwing them against a vehicle, by applying handcuffs with excessive force to induce pain compliance. Is that what you mean by securing? Caldwell stepped forward, looking confused. Your Honor, the state objects. The defense hasn't raised allegations of excessive force in this specific. Overruled, Mr. Caldwell, Corinne snapped, her eyes never leaving Harlan. I am determining the credibility of your star witness, a witness who has a documented history of escalating nonviolent encounters to manufacture probable cause. She picked up a thick stack of papers from her desk. It wasn't the Lang file. I spent the early hours of my morning reviewing your personnel file, Deputy Harlan, and Deputy Lennox's file as well. She gestured toward the trembling younger officer. I found a troubling pattern of arrests for resisting and failure to identify that invariably happen late at night in isolated areas with no body camera footage and almost exclusively targeting minorities and individuals you perceive as lacking the resources to fight back. The courtroom was dead silent. Even the court reporter had paused, staring up at the bench. The air was electric. You rely on intimidation, Corinne continued, her voice echoing off the mahogany walls. You rely on the assumption that the people you abuse will quietly plead out to avoid the crushing weight of the system. You operate under the delusion that you are the law rather than its servants. Harlan opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He was watching his entire career burn to ash in real time, lit by the match he had struck himself. Your entire testimony regarding Mr. Lang is tainted by a clear systemic disregard for the Fourth Amendment, Corinne declared, slamming the file shut. The sound made Lennox physically jump in his seat. I find this witness utterly devoid of credibility. She looked at Caldwell, who was standing completely frozen at the podium. Mr. Caldwell, the state's case rests on the uncorroborated testimony of an officer who routinely fabricates probable cause. The evidence obtained during this illegal search is hereby suppressed. Case dismissed. She banged her gavel. The loud crack echoed like a gunshot. But we are not finished, Corinne said, the wooden gavel still resting in her hand. She leaned forward, the bruising on her wrists becoming faintly visible beneath the sleeves of her robe as she rested her forearms on the desk. She looked directly into Harlan's terrified eyes. Deputy Harlan, Deputy Lennox, do not leave this courtroom. I am holding you both over for a contempt hearing. Furthermore, I am initiating a judicial review of every single arrest you have made in the past 12 months. I will be speaking directly with the district attorney and the sheriff regarding your immediate suspension pending a full internal affairs investigation. Harlan's legs finally gave out. He slumped back into the heavy wooden chair of the witness stand, his chest heaving, his face buried in his trembling hands. The power he had wielded so brutally in the dark was entirely useless in the blinding light of justice. Corinne Landry sat back in her chair, adjusting the collar of her robe. She felt the dull ache in her shoulders, a lingering reminder of the night before, but her mind was fiercely clear. Mr. Reed, she said, her voice returning to its calm, professional baseline. Call the next case. By noon, the Oak Haven County Sheriff's Department was a hive of panicked, buzzing energy. Rumors of what transpired in courtroom 3B had spread with the speed of a wildfire in dry brush. Cops who had high-fived Brock Harlan at shift change were now avoiding his desk, like it was a biohazard zone. Inside the glass-walled office of Sheriff Harlan Voss, the air conditioning was blasting. Yet the sheriff was sweating profusely. Voss was a career politician with a silver mustache and a deep aversion to scandal. Sitting across from his massive mahogany desk was District Attorney Lena Ross, a woman known for her razor-sharp intellect and absolute lack of patience for police incompetence. Do you understand the magnitude of what your deputies have done, Harlan? Lena's voice was dangerously low, her manicured fingers tapping a staccato rhythm on the leather armrest of her chair. Judge Landry didn't just hold them in contempt. She completely obliterated their credibility on the public record. Do you know what that means for my office? Voss swallowed hard, loosening his tie. Lena, it was a bad stop. They didn't know who she was. Harlan is a hothead, but he gets arrests. He gets garbage arrests, Lena snapped, leaning forward. Because of what happened this morning, Brock Harlan and Tate Lennox are now officially classified as Brady cops. Their names go on the Brady list. Every single defense attorney in the state of Georgia is legally entitled to know that these officers have a documented, judicially recognized history of lying and fabricating probable cause. She paused, letting the devastating legal reality sink in. Every pending case they're attached to, dead. Every conviction they've secured in the last 5 years, where their testimony was the primary evidence, open to appeal. They didn't just arrest a judge, Harlan. They handed a get-out-of-jail-free card to every criminal they've ever put away. They are radioactive, While the highest levels of Oak Haven's justice system were experiencing a localized earthquake, Harlan and Lennox were sitting in the fluorescent-lit purgatory of the precinct break room. Both had been stripped of their duty weapons and badges, pending the internal affairs investigation. Harlan was pacing, chewing on his thumbnail until it bled. "We just stick to the script, Tate," he muttered frantically. "She was acting erratic. We smelled alcohol. She pulled away when I tried to detain her. It was a lawful Terry stop that escalated because of her non-compliance. It's our word against hers. She doesn't have proof of excessive force." Lennox sat slumped at the plastic table, his head in his hands. He looked physically ill. "She's a superior court judge, Brock. Who do you think IA is going to believe? And what about the gas station? What if there were cameras? I checked the exterior of the Chevron building a year ago when we did a burglary call there." Harlan lied smoothly, desperately trying to project confidence. "They only have cameras pointing at the registers inside. The pumps are a blind spot, and I turned my body cam off before we even pulled up. We just say it glitched. It's happened before." What Harlan didn't know, what his arrogance prevented him from even considering, was that the world had changed since his last burglary call. Months ago, the Chevron corporate office had mandated a full security upgrade. High-definition 4K resolution cameras with ambient audio capture had been installed directly above the fuel canopies. Furthermore, Harlan had completely forgotten about Frankie Mills. At mid-afternoon, attorney Quentin Cole, a prominent civil rights litigator notorious for bankrupting corrupt police departments, walked into the Oak Haven County Courthouse. He bypassed the metal detectors with a familiar wave to the guards and headed straight for the district attorney's office. In his briefcase rested a flash drive containing the high-definition security footage legally subpoenaed just hours prior, alongside a frantic, crystal-clear cell phone video recorded by Frankie Mills from behind the sliding glass doors. Mills had known Corinne Landry for years. She always left $1 in the tip jar for his daughter's college fund. When he saw her get thrown against a car, he didn't call the police. He knew the police were the ones doing it. He called Quentin Cole. The trap was fully set, and Harlan was eagerly walking right into its jaws. In the afternoon, Deputy Brock Harlan was summoned to the Internal Affairs Division in the basement of the precinct. The room was stark, containing only a metal table, 3 chairs, and a tripod-mounted camera in the corner. Investigator Nolan Pierce, a meticulous, humorless man who had spent 20 years in the FBI before taking over Oak Haven's IA division, sat waiting. Beside Harlan sat his union representative, a heavy-breathing man named Derek Abernathy. "For the record," Pierce began, his voice a flat monotone, "this is an official administrative inquiry. You are compelled to answer these questions truthfully under penalty of perjury. Deputy Harlan, do you understand?" "I understand," Harlan said, puffing out his chest, leaning into his long-practiced bravado. "Walk me through the events at the Route 41 Chevron." Harlan cleared his throat and launched into his fabricated narrative. He spoke of a suspicious vehicle. He detailed Corinne's aggressive posture and slurred speech. He painted a picture of a dangerous, non-compliant suspect who left him no choice but to use physical force to ensure officer safety. "When you asked her for identification, what was her response?" Pierce asked, not looking up from his notepad. "She refused. She started shouting obscenities." Harlan lied without blinking. "She lunged toward the open window of the vehicle." I believed she was reaching for a weapon. I had to physically restrain her. Abernathy, the union rep, nodded approvingly. It was a textbook defense. Feared for his life. Suspect reached for an unknown object. It justified every ounce of force used. And the injuries to her wrists and shoulders? Pierce inquired. She was thrashing wildly. Any injuries sustained were a direct result of her violently resisting a lawful arrest, Harlan stated firmly. Pierce stopped writing. He slowly capped his pen, setting it down on the metal table. The silence in the room stretched until it became suffocating. Deputy Harlan, Pierce said softly, are you absolutely certain about this sequence of events? I want to give you one final opportunity to amend your statement. Harlan scoffed. I'm positive. I've been doing this 10 years, Pierce. I know a combative drunk when I see one. I don't care if she wears a black robe during the day. At night, she was a threat. I see, Pierce replied. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a sleek silver laptop. He opened it, turned the screen to face Harlan and Abernathy, and pressed a button on the keyboard. The screen flickered to life, displaying a crystal-clear, full-color, top-down angle of the Chevron gas station. The timestamp in the corner read just after 1 a.m. Harlan's blood ran cold. The air caught in his throat. The video played. The audio from the canopy's ambient microphone was pristine, picking up the crickets in the background, the hum of the neon sign, and then the roar of the police cruiser. Harlan watched himself step out of the car. He heard his own voice dripping with unprovoked malice. Evening. Whose car is this? He heard Corinne's calm, perfectly modulated response. Good evening, officer. It belongs to my daughter. There were no obscenities, there was no slurred speech, there was no lunging. The video showed Corinne gesturing with her chin toward the window. I do. It is in my purse on the passenger seat. Then came Harlan's barked command, his aggressive posturing, and the horrific moment he grabbed Corinne, who was standing perfectly still with her hands flat on the roof, and violently wrenched her arm upward. The sickening crack of her shoulder popping out of joint was audible even over the video. Stop resisting, the digital Harlan yelled, while the physical Harlan sat frozen in the chair, his world shattering into a million irreparable pieces. But Pierce wasn't done. He minimized the security footage and opened a second file. This was shaky, shot from a cell phone behind glass. Frankie Mills's video. It captured the moment Harlan hoisted Corinne up by the handcuffs, a clear violation of every use of force protocol in the country. It captured the look of absolute sadistic pleasure on Harlan's face. Pierce paused the video, the image of Harlan's cruel smirk frozen on the screen. You did not fear for your life, Brock, Pierce said, his voice dropping the professional detachment, revealing raw, unadulterated disgust. You hunted a citizen. You assaulted her, you kidnapped her, and then you walked into this room and committed felony perjury. Abernathy, the union rep, pushed his chair back from the table. He looked at Harlan with absolute horror. Brock, you lied to me. I can't defend this. You're on your own. He stood up and walked out of the room without looking back. Harlan tried to speak, but his mouth only opened and closed like a dying fish. The walls were closing in. Listen, it was a mistake, Harlan pleaded. It was a crime, Pierce corrected sharply. He pulled a fresh stack of paperwork from his briefcase. Deputy Tate Lennox was interviewed in the room next door 30 minutes ago. When presented with this exact same footage, he broke down crying. He wrote a full 10-page confession detailing how you instructed him to turn off his body camera, how you targeted Miss Landry because of the vehicle she was driving, and how you intimidated him into filing a false police report. Harlan felt the bile rise in his throat. Lennox had flipped. His partner had completely sold him out to save his own skin. "Brock Harlan," Pierce said, standing up and pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. "Stand up and place your hands behind your back. You are under arrest for aggravated assault under color of authority, false imprisonment, evidence tampering, and felony perjury." As Pierce clicked the cuffs around Harlan's wrists, making sure they were appropriately secured, not maliciously tight, Harlan caught his own reflection in the blank monitor of the laptop. He looked exactly like the terrified, broken suspects he had spent his career bullying. The universe had a wicked sense of irony, and the gavel of karma had just struck with bone-crushing force. 6 months later, the crisp autumn air whipped brown and gold leaves against the towering stone pillars of the Oak Haven County Courthouse. The media circus parked outside was unprecedented for the sleepy Georgia County. News vans from every major national network lined the streets. Their satellite dishes pointed toward the gray sky. The story of the arrogant, corrupt deputy who mistakenly arrested a newly appointed superior court judge had exploded far beyond the county lines. It had become a national sensation, a viral testament to the absolute undeniable power of instant karma. Inside courtroom 1A, the largest in the building reserved for high-profile trials, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. The gallery was packed shoulder to shoulder. Community leaders, civil rights activists, off-duty officers who despised the stain Harlan had left on their badge, and curious citizens all squeezed into the heavy oak pews. In the front row of the gallery, dressed in a muted navy blue tailored suit, sat the Honorable Corinne Landry. She was not wearing her black robe today. She was here as the victim, accompanied by her husband Caleb, who held her hand tightly, and her attorney Quentin Cole. The heavy side door creaked open, and the room collectively held its breath. Brock Harlan was escorted in by 2 heavily armed bailiffs. The collective gasp from the gallery was audible. The man who had once swaggered through the streets of Oak Haven with an air of invincible superiority was entirely unrecognizable. The crisp, pressed uniform with polished brass was gone, replaced by the dull, shapeless, and humiliating bright orange canvas of a county jail jumpsuit. His wrists and ankles were bound in heavy iron chains that rattled sickeningly with every shuffle he took. His hair had thinned dramatically. His face was gaunt and pale, and his eyes darted nervously around the room, terrified of the very public he used to terrorize. He had spent the last 6 months in solitary confinement for his own protection. Ex-cops did not survive long in the general population of the county lockup, especially not cops whose systemic perjury had just resulted in the mass release of dozens of wrongfully convicted inmates. Taking his seat at the defense table, Harlan kept his head bowed. He didn't dare look back at the gallery. He didn't have anyone looking back at him anyway. His wife had filed for divorce 3 weeks after his arrest, taking their dog and moving out of state to escape the relentless media scrutiny. The police union had publicly disavowed him. He was a ghost of a man, stripped of his power, his badge, and his dignity. Judge Harlan Thorpe, a stern, no-nonsense jurist, brought in from a neighboring district to avoid any conflicts of interest, took the bench. He adjusted his reading glasses and looked down at the broken man in the orange jumpsuit. "Mr. Harlan," Judge Thorpe began, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "You have entered a plea of guilty to the charges of aggravated assault under color of authority, false imprisonment, evidence tampering, and felony perjury. This plea was not a product of remorse, but of mathematical certainty. The evidence against you, including high-definition video and the sworn testimony of your former partner, Mr. Lennox, left you no other avenue. None." Harlan nodded infinitesimally, staring at his shackled hands resting on the wooden table. Tate Lennox had taken a plea deal months ago. In exchange for his full cooperation, his complete testimony against Harlan, and the surrender of his law enforcement certification forever, Lennox was sentenced to 3 years of probation. He now worked the night shift in a warehouse, forever exiled from the brotherhood he had so desperately tried to impress. District Attorney Lena Ross stood up from the prosecutor's table. "Your Honor, before sentencing, the state requests permission for the victim to deliver her impact statement." "Granted." Judge Thorpe nodded. Corinne Landry stood up. The courtroom fell so silent that one could hear the hum of the HVAC system. She did not rush. She walked with the exact same elegant, unyielding posture she had possessed on the night of her arrest. She stepped through the swinging wooden gate, approached the podium, and adjusted the microphone. She looked directly at the back of Harlan's bowed head. "Mr. Harlan, look at me." Her voice was not a yell. It was a calm, icy command that compelled obedience. Slowly, trembling, Harlan turned his head. His hollow eyes met hers, and he flinched, visibly shrinking into his oversized orange collar. "6 months ago, you threw me into the back of a patrol car," Corinne said, her voice carrying the weight of 1,000 silenced voices. "You bruised my wrists. You wrenched my shoulder. And you threw me into a freezing, filthy cell. You did this not because I was a threat, but because you believed I was powerless. You believed I was a nobody who could be easily crushed beneath the machinery of a system you had manipulated for your own amusement." She paused, letting the words sink into the heavy air of the courtroom. "I could have told you who I was. I could have ended the encounter with a single sentence. But I chose to remain silent. I chose to endure what you do to the citizens of this county when you think no one is watching, when you think no cameras are rolling, when you think there will be no consequences. You relied on my silence to victimize me. And in the end, my silence was the very thing that destroyed you." Harlan swallowed hard, a single tear cutting through the pallor of his cheek. It wasn't a tear of regret. It was a tear of absolute crushing defeat. "I am not standing here today for revenge," Corinne continued, her gaze sweeping over the packed gallery, looking at the faces of mothers, fathers, and sons who had been bullied by men like Harlan. "I am standing here as a promise that the badge is a shield, not a weapon, a promise that the law applies equally to the man enforcing it as it does to the citizen abiding by it. You have disgraced your uniform. You have betrayed your oath, and you have entirely dismantled your own life. Justice has been served." Corinne turned away from him, her steps echoing in the silent room as she returned to her seat next to her husband. Judge Thorpe leaned forward, his face etched in stone. Brock Harlan, your actions represent the absolute worst of law enforcement. You operated a localized tyranny fueled by prejudice and unchecked ego. You weaponized the justice system against the very people you swore to protect. The court has reviewed the comprehensive internal audit initiated by Judge Landry. Because of your systemic perjury, the district attorney's office has been forced to dismiss over 40 criminal cases. You have cost this county millions in civil liability. But more importantly, you have cost this community its trust. Thorpe picked up a thick stack of papers. It is the sentence of this court that you, Brock Harlan, be remanded to the custody of the Georgia Department of Corrections to serve a term of 12 years in a maximum security state penitentiary with no possibility of parole for the first 8 years. You are permanently stripped of your pension, your law enforcement certification, and your right to possess a firearm. The gavel came down. Bang. Bailiff, take the prisoner into custody. Harlan's knees gave out. As the bailiffs hoisted him up by his armpits, he let out a choked, guttural sob. The heavy iron chains dragged across the beautiful mahogany floor as he was practically carried out the side door. The heavy lock clicked shut, sealing his fate behind cold, unforgiving steel. The courtroom erupted. Cheers, applause, and tears of relief flooded the gallery. Justice, true, blind, and unyielding justice, had finally found its way to Oak Haven County. Later that evening, the midnight fog rolled back into Oak Haven, blanketing Route 41 just as it had months prior. A sleek, newly repaired Lexus pulled up to the pumps at the Chevron station. Corinne Landry stepped out wearing a comfortable cashmere sweater and jeans. She smoothly inserted her card into the pump. The sliding glass doors of the station opened and Frankie Mills jogged out, a wide, genuine smile breaking across his face. "Evening, Judge Landry," Frankie called out, waving a rag in his hand. "Good to see you driving your own car again." Corinne smiled warmly, pulling the nozzle from her tank. "Good evening, Frankie. It's good to have it back." "I saw the news today," Frankie said, his voice dropping slightly, filled with profound respect. "We all did. Thank you, Your Honor, for everything. Things feel different around here now. Lighter, you know." "The law is supposed to bring light, Frankie," Corinne replied softly, replacing the gas cap and giving it a firm twist. "Sometimes you just have to strike the match yourself." She walked into the store, bought her black coffee, and left her usual $1 in the tip jar. As she drove away into the quiet, peaceful night, the flashing neon lights of the Chevron station faded in her rear-view mirror. The streets of Oak Haven were finally safe, not just from the criminals breaking the law, but from the ones who wore the badge. What an absolute masterclass in karma. Judge Corinne Landry proved that true power doesn't need to shout, boast, or flash a badge. It waits, it calculates, and it lets the arrogant dig their own graves. Brock Harlan and Tate Lennox thought they caught an easy target in the dead of night, entirely unaware they had just handcuffed the very person who would dismantle their corrupt reign by sunrise. This is a stark, thrilling reminder that the universe has a perfect sense of timing, and the law, when wielded by the righteous, is an unstoppable force. If this story of ultimate justice, terrifying twists, and hard-hitting karma kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button. Share this video with anyone who loves a brilliant story of the corrupt, getting exactly what they deserve. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss another incredible true-to-life saga. Drop a comment below. What would you have done if you were in the judge's shoes? See you in the next.